I think that Shakespeare's great power is the sheer scale of the things that his plays talk about, from very small, low-down human emotions, very base emotions, sexuality, to the most loftiest questions of the nature of God and transcendence, passing through questions about politics and state and the interior emotional state of man. Microcosm about man and everything that happens with man, and the macrocosm, everything that is outside of man, everything that the questions about the universe.
A widząc, co się w Wiedniu dzieje, ujrzałem wrzący, że aż się gotuje kocioł zgorszenia. On państwo znieważa, precz! Do więzienia!
The story, Measure for Measure, Shakespeare sets it in Vienna, but it's really, I think, a way of masking what he really wants to say, which is London, at the beginning of the 17th century, under the reign of James I, and perhaps a sort of critique of a city that's fallen into a certain decadent. And the idea in the play is that the Duke, who seems to be somehow responsible for letting this happen, and who is maybe modelled on James I, some people think, we're not really sure. But anyway, he leaves and he decides to put a puritanical leader, but then very strangely he decides to stay and disguises himself as a monk. And then he kind of like watches and meddles in the lives of the other characters.
And for this we have just to change the zip here.
I was interested in the Jeremy Bentham's prison idea, the panopticon from the 18th century, for a while, and I always intrigued me the idea that you could, it's so simple, you just put somebody in the center and you hide them. The panopticon works because you feel like you're being watched, but you don't know. And so if you feel like you're being watched, you become some kind of performer. It's an interesting, almost philosophical question. The idea of a peep show, it's a kind of reverse panopticon in a way, because the people doing the looking aren't in the center, but are on the outside, and they're looking in. So it's a kind of like trying to put together two ideas, really, I think.
Jeśli byś łaskaw był mi wybierać, to ja bym wolał baty.
Najpierw łaskawcu baty, a potem stryjczyk.
I think the more I work on it, the more I think it is a comedy, but it's a strange comedy. It's a sort of metaphysical comedy of some kind. It seems to have kind of elements of farce about it in its construction, the way the scenes are put together. It's often ridiculous, absurd. And not funny in an ordinary way, though. It's got something sort of that remains strange, weird, almost kind of uncomfortable in the humour. The way it jumps between sort of like almost like a clown-like comedy with these kind of like lowly characters who are street characters, pimps and prostitutes, and the humour is very often comes across as very basic, very vulgar almost, and then suddenly you'll be in a scene where the characters are talking in a very poetic way and saying very beautiful things. So it's not like any other comedy that I've worked on. So it is a kind of comedy, and it's also not a tragedy, but it's got some kind of philosophical kind of nature to it as well.
Dumny urzędzie. Jak często strojem, zewnętrzną powłoką głupców tumanisz, nawet mędrca duszę opętasz czczym pozorem.
There are questions of justice and mercy and things like that that come up through all this very complicated plot. But it's also, I think, about the Duke thinking that he can control, manipulate, change the destinies of the characters in the play, and ultimately finding himself very human. So it's a very, very complex play, and you feel like when you work on it, it's a play that you'll never really get. You know, there's many, many different ways that you could do this play. That's what makes it so interesting, I think. The music starts.
Zaczyna się muzyka.
And it starts moving already.
Zaczyna się już obracać.
And he turns and he goes, oh,
Obraca się.
the peep show's happening.
Peep show się odbywa.
In making this peep show, which is probably nothing like a peep show, we made a sort of like a turning, half panopticon, half peep show turning object. But it felt like it was necessary to keep true, aesthetically, to be close somehow to the 1980s. And so the costumes and the peep show itself and the music will give us a slightly retro, but modern, you know, a kind of modern retro feel. You become aware that the theatre, it's like some kind of labyrinth, you know, some kind of like game that we find ourselves in. I think that's interesting.
Pośpiech pośpiechem, zwłokę spłacisz zwłoką, miarka za miarka i oko za oko.